You are holding a rock. It is black, smooth, and sharper than anything you have ever touched. You did not make it. You found it near a volcano. And when you struck it against another stone, it broke into an edge so thin it could open your skin before you even felt it. This is obsidian, volcanic glass. And roughly 700,000 years ago, a human ancestor in Kenya's Rift Valley picked up a piece of this exact material and used it as a tool. That is the first known moment a human being held glass in their hand. Not a window, not a lens, not a screen, just a rock that formed when molten earth cooled too fast to become anything else. Glass had existed on this planet for billions of years before anyone learned to make it. Lightning struck sand and left behind hollow glass veins called fulgurites. Meteorites melted entire stretches of desert into sheets of crystal. Volcanoes bled rivers of stone that hardened into obsidian fields. Nature had been quietly manufacturing glass since long before life existed. And for hundreds of thousands of years, humans used it without understanding what it was, or that they could ever make it themselves. Then someone did, and that single accident reshaped the trajectory of the species. Here is the part almost no one gets right. Glass is not a liquid. You have probably heard that old cathedral windows are thicker at the bottom because the glass has spent centuries slowly oozing downward. It is a myth. A physicist in Brazil calculated in 1998 that cathedral glass would need longer than the age of the universe to show any visible flow at room temperature. Those windows are uneven because medieval glassmakers spun molten discs that were naturally thicker on one edge, and installers simply placed the heavy side down. The glass never moved. It was built that way from the start. What glass actually is stranger than a slow liquid. It is what scientists call an amorphous solid. Atoms locked in the disordered arrangement of a liquid, frozen there before they ever had the chance to organize into the neat repeating grid of a crystal. Cool most liquids slowly, and their atoms line up like soldiers. Cool them fast enough, and the atoms simply stop where they are, caught mid-motion. Glass is a material suspended forever in the instant between two states of matter. Physicists still argue about how to classify it, and that unresolved in-between nature is precisely what makes it so useful. It begins with sand. Silicon dioxide melts at over 1,700 degrees Celsius, far beyond the reach of any ancient fire, until you add a flux, a mineral that drags the melting point down to something a kiln could manage. Ancient glassmakers used natron, harvested from dry lake beds in Egypt, and mixed it with sand to bring the melting point down to around 1,000 degrees. But there was a catch. Glass made only from sand and natron dissolves in rainwater, so they added crushed limestone as a stabilizer. Roughly 70% silica, 15% soda, 10% lime. A 5,000-year-old formula, that is, give or take. Still the recipe printing out most of the glass on Earth today. So who found it first? And how? The Roman writer Pliny told a story that survived 2,000 years. Phoenician traders resting cooking pots on blocks of natron on a beach, and molten glass pouring out from beneath the fire. It is a beautiful story. It is almost certainly false. An open beach fire cannot reach the temperatures required. The truth is Messier. The earliest known man-made glass beads appear in Mesopotamia and Egypt around 2500 BC, likely discovered by accident during the production of faience, a glazed ceramic material. When the glassy surface residue in the kiln was noticed, scraped free, and recognized as something new in its own right, nobody set out to invent glass. They were making something else entirely, and glass fell out sideways. Which, if you look closely, is how an unsettling number of history's biggest inventions actually happened. And here is the detail that rarely makes it into the story. Egypt and Mesopotamia appear to have discovered glassmaking completely independently of each other. Chemical analysis of trace elements in early glass samples from both regions, published in 2012, shows distinct signatures tied to each region's own raw materials. Two civilizations, no contact, the same accident, twice for its first 1,000 years. Glass was not a household object. It was treated like a gemstone. Diplomatic letters from the 14th century BC show rulers complaining to Egyptian pharaohs about the poor quality of glass sent as royal gifts, the same tone modern leaders might use over a shipment of substandard jewels. At the lost city of Amarna, archaeologists uncovered an entire industrial workshop. Furnaces, colored glass rods, half-finished vessels, evidence of a two-stage melting process refined enough to produce clear, bubble-free glass 34 centuries ago. and inside the tomb of Tutankhamun sits a carved scarab beetle that, for decades, was misidentified as an ordinary gemstone. It was only confirmed in 1998 to be natural glass formed in the Libyan desert nearly 29 million years ago, almost. Certainly from a meteorite impact, Egyptian craftsmen found a fragment of glass older than humanity itself, had no idea what it was or where it came from, and simply thought it was beautiful enough to place on a dead king's chest for 15 centuries after that. Every hollow glass vessel on Earth was shaped the same painstaking way, molded around a clay core, one piece at a time. Hours of labor for a single bottle glass stayed rare because nobody had found a faster way to shape it then. Around 50 BC, on the coast of what is now Lebanon or Syria, someone put a blob of molten glass on the end of a hollow pipe and blew. What do you think happens to a civilization the moment a luxury material suddenly becomes something anyone can own? Glass blowing collapsed the labor of hours into minutes. Vessels became thinner, lighter, genuinely transparent, and for the first time in history, ordinary people, not just kings, could own glass. The Romans didn't invent the technique, but they industrialized it across the empire. And a Roman writer noted that glass cups could soon be bought for a single copper coin. The Romans even built something previously unthinkable: windows, evidence of which survives under the volcanic ash at Pompeii. And they built something stranger still, a 4th century drinking vessel now in the British Museum that turns from jade green to blood red, depending on which direction light passes through it. For centuries, no one could explain it. In 1990, researchers finally found the answer under a microscope. The glass is embedded with gold and silver particles roughly 50 nanometers wide, invisible to the naked eye, manipulating light through a physical effect modern scientists still use in medical sensors today. The Romans built nanotechnology 1600 years before anyone had a word for it. If a detail like that has genuinely surprised you so far, that's exactly the moment worth dropping into the comments. Which civilization's accident do you think mattered most? Egypt's kiln or Rome's cup? Because what comes next is where glass stops being an object people admire and starts being the thing that rewrites what humans are even capable of knowing. Centuries later, in Venice, glassmaking became a matter of state security. In 1291, the Republic forced every furnace onto the island of Murano, ostensibly to prevent fires, but really to trap the knowledge, and the craftsmen who carried it. Murano glassmakers were forbidden to leave the Republic under threat to their families. Around 1450, one of them, Angelo Baraviere, invented cristallo, glass so clear it rivaled rock crystal. And Venice held the secret for 2 centuries, until France lured Murano workers to Paris and eventually lined the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles with hundreds of panels. A political statement made entirely out of glass, but somewhere else in Europe, quietly, glass was inventing science itself. Eyeglasses appeared in Italy around 1286, extending the working lives of aging scholars by a decade or more at a time. When failing eyesight simply ended a career. When the printing press exploded across Europe, less than 2 centuries later, glass and literacy fed each other in a loop that helped drag Europe out of intellectual stagnation. In 1609, Galileo pointed an improved telescope at Jupiter and saw 4 moons orbiting a planet that was not Earth, and with that single glass-assisted glance, the universe stopped revolving around us. Around the same time, a self-taught Dutch cloth merchant ground tiny lenses by hand and became the first person to see bacteria and sperm cells, calling them little animals. In letters to London, 2 curved pieces of glass, one aimed at the sky, one aimed at a drop of water, and between them, humanity discovered it was both smaller and more insignificant, and vastly more capable than anyone had imagined. The story doesn't stop with telescopes. An accidentally cracked laboratory flask in 1903 led directly to the laminated safety glass in every windshield on Earth. A dormant, forgotten Cold War-era research project called Kemker sat in a filing cabinet for 45 years until Steve Jobs needed a scratch-resistant screen for the first iPhone, and it was reborn as Gorilla Glass, now inside more than 8 billion devices and buried under the ocean right now. Over 500 million kilometers of ultra-pure glass fiber carry more than 95% of the world's international internet traffic as pulses of light, meaning the sentence you are hearing right now almost certainly traveled to you through sand. Nobody ever planned any of this. Nobody sat by a fire 4,500 years ago and declared they were about to melt sand into a transparent solid. It happened twice, independently, by accident, in two civilizations that never spoke to each other, because the same materials and the same fire produced the same strange result. Anywhere on Earth, someone noticed a thin, shining residue where nothing should have been forming, and instead of scraping it away and moving on, they looked closer. Every window, every lens, every fiber optic cable beneath the ocean floor, and the very screen your eyes are resting on right now, all trace back to that one decision. If this kind of hidden history is the sort of thing you want more of, the next one is already waiting. You just have to stay close enough to catch it.